So one of the things I'd like to do in introducing this panel is to try to create a context for the discussion that you're going to hear. And I really touched on it yesterday within our own research program, moving to using longitudinal data to really be able to follow individuals and how their health and outcomes change over time. And so much of the data work that you see or read about is so often cross-sectional data in a given year. And it really limits understanding of what's going on and how things are changing. I don't know how many times that people call us at IBI and they say, well, you know, your benchmarking data from last year and your benchmarking data from this year, well, that means there's this X% trend, right? And we always say no, because they're different samples, and you can't do that. So the ability to look longitudinally at the same people as they utilize programs and make conclusions is really important. And I was telling Gary that when I saw the proposal that Cigna submitted for the conference and knew the things that we were doing, I thought it was really a perfect launching point for that discussion today. So with that in mind, I'd like to introduce Gary Fritsch from Cigna. Gary?
Good afternoon, everybody. Somebody way smarter than me once said that those who fail to remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And I think you'll be happy to know that one of our goals here today is to help us all avoid some of that as we take a look at some trends that we've gleaned and some insights from 20 years of disability history and what it means in terms of where our medical and societal trends have taken us from an absence and productivity standpoint. My name is Gary Fritsch, and I've been with Cigna working in absence and disability and productivity for over 20 years myself. And I currently am responsible for reporting and analytics for our wellness, absence, and productivity. And I'm joined today by Dr. Steve Halpern.
Introduction, Steve Halpern, Medical Director from Cigna. Absolutely delighted to be here. I work directly with our largest national accounts in the West. I'm also here because I've had the singular delight and honor to work with our friends at Conway, particularly Sara, Hart, for the last 7 years. So again, very pleased to be here.
So things really are so different today from when they were 20 years ago. I mean, 20 years ago we had worldwide media following the every move of a British princess and the crowning of a new comedic genius to take over The Tonight Show and an edgy movie about the plight of people with AIDS and the leader of the Catholic Church being named Time Magazine's Man of the Year.
So yeah, 20 years later and we've got British princess, right? We've got Tonight Show, comedic genius. We've got a cutting-edge movie about AIDS, and yep, different pope, but still cover of Time magazine. So, you know, maybe things haven't changed quite that much. And I can tell you another thing that has not changed, and this hasn't changed since the dawn of time. So since 10,000 years ago, the 4 o'clock speaker, right, is going to make the joke about us standing between you and cocktail hours. It used to be fermented mammoth milk. Well, now it's, real cocktails. But I'm not going to make that joke. But let's see whether my colleagues will be able to resist the temptation. So some things haven't changed over the last 20 years, but clearly certain things have, right? We watch music differently. We watch... You're trying to mess with me?
Sorry.
We watch movies differently. Our cell phones have changed. We get our TV differently. We don't even call it TV anymore, right? We call it video. And there's that little thing called the internet. There's also just more of us, both in terms of number and, well, there's just more of us. And we'll kind of talk about that in just a second. It's been one of those continuing themes. So as we scratch below the surface, let's take a look at some of those 20-year trends. I do have to make an apology because the title slide, I don't know if you saw the title slide, it says startling trends over the last 20 years. And well, I wouldn't go startling, I would go intriguing, interesting, that kind of thing. Startling is what happens when you give your slides to your marketing folks. So note to self, don't ever do that. Trust me, you get startling and the bar is set super high. So the things that really concern us So we're talking about work-life balance and this, employee health, absence, productivity. We need to ask ourselves the question, have things changed or has there actually been progress? I mean, there certainly has been progress, right? 20 years ago, somebody said, hey, I'm going to come at you with a laser, burn your eye, and this is going to be a good thing. I'm going to run away. Now I get, coupons in my spam folder for that. So that certainly changed. Earlier detection, we're much better about detecting cancer earlier, but we're also smarter about figuring out whether that's always a good thing, because it isn't always a good thing, right? Better medicines. I mean, I never thought I'd be standing up here saying we had a cure for hepatitis C. I mean, this is absolutely amazing. We also watch all those TV commercials, and let's just stipulate that I've already made the joke about erectile dysfunction, and let's just go on. So that's another thing that hasn't changed. Microsurgeries, laparoscopic surgeries that people used to stay in the hospital for 10 days for, and now done as an outpatient. Obviously, there's been significant progress over the last 20 years. But some things haven't really progressed, they just changed. We're older. I mean, 20 years, I was 20 years younger 20 years ago. But as a workforce, we've aged. 25% more of us are over the age of 45 in the workplace. As I said before, there's just more of us. Obesity, the rate of obesity has doubled over the last 20 years, truly remarkable. But we're also doing different things. Folks are working in the service sector more and more, and I guarantee you they're not getting aerobic exercise on those jobs. So as we look at these trends, we have to ask ourselves, how has this changed absence? And has it been a good thing, or has it been a bad thing?
So what do we look at, and what do we see? We took a look at 20 years of non-maternity short-term disability claim data, and our data included information on industry, demographics, occupations, plan design, major and minor diagnostic categories, and of course, outcomes like average duration, return to work, and total absence. As you can imagine, there were lots of cuts of data. So you'll be happy to know that since we're standing between you and happy hour, we're only going to hit a couple of the top
he couldn't even wait to the next
trends.
slide.
Okay, so we're going to take a look at how the claim distribution, duration, and number of and percent of absence have changed for the top 7 diagnostic categories. Now, when I first started working with disability claims back in 1992, we were still trying to figure out how we were going to incorporate something called duration guidelines into our process. So obviously we've come a long way in terms of our disability management, and you see that reflected here in the big pink bars. Average durations have gone down for almost all of the diagnostic categories, and obviously some of the big ones here. Let's take a look at a couple of the good guys first, though. Circulatory conditions. They are way down in terms of, they're down in terms of percent of claims, and almost 25% reduction in terms of average duration. This coincides very closely with a significant decrease in morbidity due to cardiac conditions nationwide over the course of the last decade. We also see that respiratory absence is down significantly. Flu vaccines, better medicines for bronchitis and asthma allow people to avoid some of those absences that would have lasted more than 7 or 10 days before. And maybe the most surprising, I'm not sure if it's startling or not, but maybe most surprising is mental disorders are contributing a little less to the overall picture of absence now than they did 20 years ago. We'll take some time to dig into that one just a little bit later. Now, on the other side, given our aging population, it's probably no surprise to see that musculoskeletal absence is on the rise, and that absence due to neoplasms or cancer is also on the rise. Now, while these trends are maybe interesting at a high level, if we want to really get to anything that's actionable or something that we want to be able to get to some detail on, we've got to get on to the next level. So when we take a look and break this down into 267 subdiagnostic categories, we can see some clearer trends. Musculoskeletal joint conditions are still, they were 20 years ago and still are now, the top contributor to absence. Most of these are knee injuries. You might be looking at this saying, but what about the back conditions? Where are the back conditions? Well, those are actually captured across 8 sub-diagnostic categories, and if we added those together, those would be the #1 driver 20 years ago and today. These things are just not going away, folks. Our aging population has caused some other things to drive a little bit further. Tendinitis, bursitis, arthritis. Any of you who have tried to stay, are over 40 and have tried to stay active, know how quickly these things can cause you some problems in your ability to do those things. And so those continue to be rising concerns. But today we're going to focus on 4 key areas, not because they're the biggest trends or because they're driving the most money, but because they really help us see an underlying trend of medical and societal changes having unintended consequences on absence and productivity. The 4 areas. Herniated disc. It went from number 8 to number 4, and I think you're going to be surprised to see who's really driving that change. Depression, which accounts for 80% of all mental illness, drops down to number 5, and you might think, oh, it should be less of a concern. We'll see that there's a lot more below the surface than what you see here. Skin cancer claims account for almost 5 times as much absence as they did 20 years ago. I think you may be startled to see how they line up with other diagnostic categories or other neoplasm categories in terms of their impact on absence. So we'll take a look at that. And the last one is obesity. Obesity is the 800-pound gorilla in the room, literally. And it's always been a common comorbidity, but now we see some of that presenteeism shifting to absenteeism. So we're going to start off by taking a look at kind of that complex picture of obesity and what's happening with that.
800-pound gorilla, seriously? So as we say, there's just more of us. But in the jungle of fad diets, magic diet pills, and amazing exercise regimens that'll drop 20 pounds in the next week, one thing has changed and is here to stay, and that's bariatric surgery. If you take a look at the graph, there's been a huge increase, and again, this is not a surprise to anybody. Laparoscopic procedures started coming into the market in about 1996, and the lap band surgery licensed in 2001. There's been a big increase. We're now doing 200,000 of these procedures annually. What's been kind of interesting to many of us in the field, though, is it's kind of leveled off, right? The last few years, it looks like it's kind of flat, which was not what we would have predicted, but actually kind of interesting. But bariatric surgery, it does work. If you take a look at short-term and intermediate-term outcomes, cholesterol gets better, blood pressure gets better, sleep apnea gets better, and you can pretty much cure diabetes, it looks like. Who would have known that you can take out part of the stomach and within 2 or 3 days, diabetes goes away? So that's pretty amazing. On the other hand, bariatric surgery is still high upfront costs. There's still surgical risk. And in terms of long-term outcomes, things that are important, like do you live longer? The jury's still out on that one. And from a medical perspective, not sure that's a good thing and a bad thing. But in terms of productivity,
yeah, we do have to look at productivity here, and I loved an IBI piece that they did a while ago on the cost of obesity and metabolic syndrome. And what I've done here is I've modeled out what that looks like on a 1,000 employee scale. There's about 1 bariatric surgery per 1,000 employees. And that surgery in terms of STD costs averages about $7,200 in terms of STD benefits. Now, if we consider how many people might be obese but not having the surgery, that would probably be, based on averages, about 280 of those individuals. You see on the graph here that there's $365,000 attributable to presenteeism. And if you divide that by those 280 obese individuals, it's about $3,200 in presenteeism cost per year for those who are obese and at work. So where's the real problem? I think what we see very clearly here is that the bariatric surgery and the absence we see relative to that is the tip of the iceberg. And it just gives us an indication of how big that iceberg is underneath that level of presenteeism. And we always need to keep that in mind. So the obesity is much more than a BMI number. And I've heard a number of people talk about this today, and I'm really glad to see everybody's kind of thinking in that direction. It's really a complex mixture of a number of factors: job tenure, flexibility, lifestyle modification, demographic factors, comorbid conditions. And there really is no silver bullet. Bariatric surgery is not it. Fat diets aren't it. So what is the answer? Well, the solution, as far as we can see, should have two elements. One, it has to be prepared to adjust to the circumstances of the individual. There is no one-size-fits-all. It has to be prepared to meet them where they're at and help them in the ways that they're willing to be helped. And second of all, it must also be geared towards long-term sustained change. Study after study has shown that about 10% change in body weight delivers almost all of the benefits that people need to get from losing weight. So it doesn't have to be a big change in that regard.
So cancer, aging population, we expected to see more cancer. We expected to see, more higher incidence. What we didn't expect to see was for the pattern to change. So skin cancer is now among the top 3 in terms of absence. Never would have predicted that. Partly due to just, sun exposure, but it's also because of tanning salons. And, I'm particularly partial to the cute names. Bronze Buns is my favorite. That's my local tanning salon. But not so much if it's going to increase my risk of melanoma by 75%. So skin cancer, that was a change. Also, more subtle changes. We're identifying cancers earlier. Like I said, that's not always a good thing. Good for colon cancer, good for a number of cancers. Prostate cancer, maybe not. Breast cancer, right? We're starting to see some questions about that. But when we do identify cancer earlier, they're treated. So we get a lot more people being diagnosed, getting treated for cancer, but not as sick. So they're not out for as long. But now they're coming back to the workplace. And despite our best efforts, some of those folks are going to recur. And so they're high-risk people now back in the workplace. It's kind of changed the whole dynamic. And so this is kind of some of the things that are accounting for the trends that we see.
Yeah, that's a really important point. So now all the survivors are coming back into the workplace as high-risk individuals within our workforce. Hey, not that that's a bad thing. The alternative is not a very good one, right? So, but we have to figure out the way that we're going to deal with that. How do we get a little bit better at dealing with that? And, the one great thing about cancer, and I know that sounds really odd, but stick with me here for a second. The one great thing about cancer is that universally, people rally around someone with cancer. The manager accommodates them. Their coworkers contact them. They are welcomed back into the workplace. The employee themselves acknowledges what's going on with them, and they are determined to beat this condition. We have millions and millions of people all over the country rallying and wearing pink and blue and having fundraisers, all to help to support the people who are battling cancer. Now, this makes cancer sort of the ultimate poster child for return to work accommodation and attitude. Even in LTD, I've been in front of hundreds of clients talking about their LTD and STD experience, and return to work is always the highest for cancer, even on LTD. And over 20 years, we saw that 97% of the people who went out on a cancer claim and were able to return to work did. That's the highest of any of the diagnostic categories. So it's a really surprising result, and it just shows you that what's possible, what could be done. And it's not because the accommodations are easy. People who are returning to work from cancer have fatigue and nausea and pain and weakness. It isn't as simple as a 5-pound lifting restriction or you can only stand for half an hour. So even despite this, when people are willing to put in the effort and have the right attitude, they can really develop some great results around return to work.
Depression. So again, not a surprise to folks. Almost 7% of folks will have a severe mental health disorder during any given year. And about 25% of folks, that's 1 in 4 of us, will have a diagnosable condition during the years. In the 1990s, there was a big increase in treatment for depression, but the way we treat depression has changed remarkably. So in the last 20 years, the number of people treated for depression with antidepressants has doubled from 37% to 74%. And I know, controversial, Prozac Nation, are we overtreating, is how effective they are, but it's a fact. We've changed, we're treating with medication. We're also doing a lot less psychotherapy. So 20 years ago, 71% of folks were getting therapy few years ago, that was 61%, and the latest numbers look like it's actually less than 50% of people who are getting therapy for depression as opposed to medications. So
the impact from a productivity standpoint, first of all, how many people here would have thought that absence due to mental illness is on the rise? Yeah, a lot of you, right? We hear national studies saying, hey, mental illness absence is on the rise. Two factors play into that. One, the people that they're talking about aren't all employed. A lot of them are unemployed people who aren't in the workforce that we're looking at these days. And two, they also include within there something called dysthymia, which is a mild chronic form of depression. It might not cause people to miss work, but it certainly will cause them to have some impact in terms of how they're able to do their jobs and how effective they are in that. So we do see average duration for claims coming down because we have these medical advances, et cetera. But really we have a large swell of presenteeism relative to mental illness. And this is a big issue. As I mentioned before, cancer is a model for return to work. Mental illness is a model for return to work dysfunction. Employees are reluctant to disclose their condition. Managers are uncomfortable discussing and accommodating it. Employers throw their hands up in the air when they think about how am I supposed to accommodate work for somebody who has a psychological limitation. I just don't know. And so from that standpoint, there probably is something to learn from the cancer model around the mental illness model. What would happen I just want you to imagine for a second, what would happen if mental illness was really mind cancer? Right? And everybody could just say, hey, I was just diagnosed with, mental illness. And everybody would say, oh, wow, oh, man, I'm so sorry to hear that. What can I do to help? How can I accommodate? How can I reach out? Let's talk. Is everything going okay? Are you feeling all right? Checking in on the person, all those things. It doesn't happen in today's world. We need to start building that into the models that we have in our workplace. And, I hate to say it, folks, but it starts with the people in this room. We're the leaders out there in organizations around how behavior is changed. So that conversation has to start with the people in this room.
Finally, let's take a look at discs and pain, and there's a tie-in with behavioral health here also. So neck pain, pretty common, 10% of folks. Back pain, 85% of folks. Pretty much everybody in this room is going to have a significant episode of back pain during their lives. Surgery works in the right people, right? But we're clearly doing way too many surgeries for back that are just ineffective. You guys probably know this, right? So about 2/3 of us, 2/3 of people in this room, if we took an MRI of the back, would have a bulging disc, something wrong with our discs, right? Which could conceivably lead to surgery. But what better predicts whether you have surgery or not is not what your MRI shows, it's who your boss is. Right? So this is the moment where everybody kind of looks at themselves and says, oh my God, am I that boss? I hope not. But when Comcast talks about the heat maps, right, about bosses and turnover rates and employee engagement problems, it takes some organizational courage. And I see this on the medical side in terms of back surgeries. However, on the plus side, we're able to do much less invasive surgeries these days and the durations are shortened.
So one of the good effects, and you might have guessed this already, less invasive surgery, shorter recovery time. Durations are down 12 days from 20 years ago, but most of that improvement happened in the first 10 years. Last 10 years has been pretty steady. What we have seen is that there's a lot more surgery among the sedentary occupations, professionals and officials and managers and office workers. Those are the people who now, because they fear surgery less, are willing to undergo that in order to get an improved lifestyle. It's not about whether they can work or not. It's about whether they can maintain a lifestyle that they like. The employer is left, it's a little cold, but the employer is left kind of holding the bag for that because the employees decided to improve their lifestyle. We need to recognize, well, that employee is me, and they should be able to improve their lifestyle, and it's not going away. So how will we as employers address that? How can we make sure that we have every bit of support and flexibility in place to allow those employees to return to work as quickly as they can from surgery? Also, to make sure they have really strong treatment decision support tools and they know that they're there and they're made aware of them at the right time in order to say, well, is surgery the right answer for me? Because many people kind of rush to that judgment when if they wait 6 months, most conditions improve. So that's a big part of how things are changing. Is we see a lot more in the sedentary occupations. The good thing for employers is that it's way easier to accommodate people who are in those sedentary occupations, right? It was funny, we were in one of the breakout sessions earlier today, and somebody asked, how many have 20% or more of your employees working from home? And a large number of people in the room raised their hand. That's a great way to be able to accommodate some people who are recovering from surgery in those more professional and sedentary occupations. So in terms of those kind of 4 key areas that we looked at, how can we really avoid repeating history? What are some things that we can do? Just quick recap on that. First of all, obesity. You don't have to have a biggest loser contest, right? Really, 10% change in body weight is what really drives all the improvement. Surgery is the right call for some people. Again, they need great decision support tools and the right people to talk them through those tools. But it's not going to be, it has to be a multi-phased approach. You have to have lots of different carrots and sticks, or maybe just carrot sticks. Either way, you have to make sure that you are accommodating the individual in that circumstance. From a cancer standpoint, we all have a story. How many people in the room, raise your hand if you yourself or a loved one has had to deal with cancer? Yeah, not surprising. Almost every hand in the room is in the air, and it's affecting everybody. So we have to stop looking at cancer like, oh, when you're 50, go have your prostate exam. We have to talk more proactively with people about the activities they have to avoid. Smoking, as we saw in a couple of presentations, we're getting a little bit of an edge on smoking. We're helping people out there, but we also have to do things and address things like tanning and sun protection and those kind of things as well. Depression. It is out there, folks. So, show of hands, how many people in the room have dealt with depression for you or a loved one? All right, good. That's about right. We know that about 26%, right? So we need to make sure that we have that conversation, that we're as open and direct with dealing with that as we are with other conditions. And the last one, herniated disc, or really any musculoskeletal condition, we need to make sure we're applying all of those tools and tactics for getting people to return to work as quickly as possible with whatever limitations they might have. Now, how can we take that conversation then from, okay, these are a couple of specific conditions. What do I do as an employer? Like, what are the strategies, the larger strategies that I can employ that will help me to combat some of these trends? Not just these trends, but any others that pop up, right? Who knows what the next trend will be? One, absence prediction and prevention. We've heard a number of people have mentioned predictive modeling. Using medical data, biometric data, HRA data, to predict the people who are at risk for going out on disability and offering them the services on a proactive basis. Don't rely on money as your only incentive. Engage people when they really need it. So when somebody goes out on disability, it might be the first time that they're really having a huge impact from a chronic condition that they've dealt with for years. Now's the time to offer them some support and say, we can help you now. What about now? Making sure that we have vocational programs that don't just look at return to work, but stay at work. Be proactive and identify people early on through FML programs, et cetera, and say, how can I help you to stay productive and keep you from going out in the first place? And maybe most importantly, seeing productivity as a health outcome. In many cases, employees can improve their productivity before or while they're improving their health condition. We don't have to wait for them to recover from something before they can start addressing how it's impacting their productivity. And it's really important that we take that view, because employers often don't have enough levers to change those other things in somebody's life. So this might seem kind of vague. So what we did is we decided that we were going to bring today an employer, a client of ours that is going to speak to you about how they implemented some of these strategies in their workplace. And I have to tell you that when I first talked to Sara about coming and presenting with us here, I left just really, really excited about the prospect of her talking to us for two reasons. One, The tactics that they're using at Conway are real and tactical and tangible. And secondly, she was so passionate and excited about what they're doing and how they're doing it and why they're doing it that I thought she's the perfect person to come here and talk to you about how you can really look at productivity as an outcome. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce Sara Hart, Sara Hart from Conway. And I apologize, Sara, there's no appropriate red carpet for you to walk on as you come up here. She's a star in our minds.
I was imagining the ball gown. I mean, wouldn't that be great? I'm Sara Hart. I've been with Conway almost 25 years. Who ever knew it would last that long? And Conway is a $6 billion premier supplier of transportation and logistics services. We have employees and operate in 22 countries, but the biggest part of our operation is moving freight by truck here in the United States. And to that end, we have nearly 30,000 domestic employees, and over 75% of those are truck drivers. And those truck drivers are people that by and large are home every night. We don't have very many, only 2,000 or 3,000 over-the-road truck drivers where they live in their cabs. So our truck drivers are home every day, and they have very hard jobs. Our biggest competitive advantage at Conway is the professionalism and the quality of our workforce. And also, we count as a huge competitive advantage the fact that we can remain union-free across our enterprise in the transportation industry. But there are a lot of changes, and a lot of changes have come up. And the first is at Conway, like many other places, we have an aging workforce. And our competitive business environment is much more stringent than it used to be. And healthcare is a game changer in so many ways. And just to work on that theme of how it used to be, I've been doing this job a long time, and I remember distinctly when being in benefits was glamorous and everybody liked you. And then when I first heard earnings per share in the same sentence as employee benefits, I knew the glory days were over and we needed to change the game. So that's how it was, and I think that's how it is for most of us now. How do I make it go to the next one? Oh, see, I forgot the part about the clicker. Okay. So at Conway, we've come a long ways in 16 years. 16 years ago, we had no employee premiums, and our PEPM cost was about $500. Today, we still offer an employee benefit or employee-only program with no employee costs, but our PEPM costs are almost double. We have very low preventive engagement across our workforce, and we've embarked on this 3-year journey to get people to understand what their health conditions are. So we've been doing health risk assessments with biometrics for 3 years now. The first 2 years, we got very low results. So this year, we amped it up considerably. We used surcharges, and for an employee and spouse who didn't do the 3 things we asked them to do, the additional cost to them in their paycheck is $3,120 a year. So we got a lot of people's attention by amping up the surcharges. And the 3 things we asked people to do this year were to do the health assessment online. They had to provide validated or verified biometric numbers. So we weren't going to use the make up your own number anymore. And they had to attest that they were tobacco-free. So employee and spouse doing all those things would save $3,120 a year. But the reality was not very pretty, and we just got some of the results back from the biometric screenings this year, and they're worse than from what you see on the screen. 83% of our population, again with validated numbers this year, have a BMI of 25% or greater, and 40% are above 30, and 9% are above 40. So that is I hesitate to use the word huge, but that's a very big problem in our workforce where we have hard jobs. Our HDL cholesterol numbers are, for both men and women, are above 50, and our hypertension scores are 25% higher than the CDC norm. So we have a lot of risks associated with with our population. Productivity, people are measured on productivity at Conway. And they're not just measured by getting the freight on time to its destination and getting it there undamaged. There are a lot of factors that go into productivity. In addition, our driving workforce has to pass a DOT physical, and that right there is their ticket to drive, their ticket to their livelihood. So it's one of the key things that we have to incent people to engage in keeping their health, because if they don't keep their health within DOT parameters, they lose their ticket to drive. So there's a lot of challenges. We have at Conway a lot of tools in place to measure and to engage people productively, and some of those are very simple, including standard work instructions. So we have go see, go do, so people can find out the best ways to do things. Our toolkit includes a thoughtful process based on lean methodologies to reduce rework and redundancies in the work process, and that increases productivity. We maintain a supportive, no-fear environment where employees are expected to be engaged in how the workplace is run and to find safety issues and report them or help to fix them, be part of the solution. We have a robust training process that includes best practices and, most importantly, I think, employee input and employee feedback on training. So we use our experienced drivers, our experienced people who've driven 2 million or 3 million accident-free miles, which is pretty darn amazing, to instruct, coach, and counsel our drivers who are just coming up in the industry. But we can't change our health population overnight. And while we're spending $150+ million on just chronic conditions and musculoskeletal conditions each year, the benefits office is challenged to support the business in one big single thing, and that's keep drivers at work. It's really expensive for us to recruit, hire, and train a driver and keep that driver accident-free. And it's also very hard to recruit drivers, even though driving jobs are very well-paid jobs in the marketplace. They're hard physical work. There's long hours, and generally, for the most part, you have to stay drug-free even on the weekends to keep your CDL. So a lot of considerations for people to take these jobs. But once they have these jobs, most people want to stay on the job, and we hear that from our employees so often, especially when they go out on disability. So disability, we think of it as a very complex phenomenon. It's physical, social, behavioral, mental, financial, lots of factors, complex factors go into what we might consider somebody who's disabled. And when Cigna came to us with a pilot, asked us to pilot a predictive model approach that could connect all those complex factors together and possibly keep our people on the job, we were really very intrigued and wanted to see, how we could participate in that. The model was to identify people that were at risk before they actually went out on a disability. And so we entered the pilot, and Gary's going to provide you with some of the results from that pilot, which are startling, no, fascinating, compelling.
So I think one of the things that I wanted to point out is that this is just one part of like a multi-pronged approach that that Conway has taken, and I think that sometimes Sara doesn't toot her own horn as much as she should, but they really pushed us to do some great things for them, and we'll touch on those. First of all, absence prediction and prevention. We had to ask employers to become involved in this because it was a pilot. We were testing a concept to see if we could identify people proactively and then help to reduce their absence. So what we were going to do is we were going to take and identify 2 employees, one gets some help and the other one doesn't, so that we would have a randomized trial. And that's exactly what we did. We did it with Conway and 23 other employers who agreed to do this. They all said, well, I'd rather have half of my employees help than none. So they agreed to participate in the trial, and we ran this for, we're on 2+ years now, and the initial results from this showed that we were able to reduce disability absence by 15% for those individuals that were in our study group. So the people that were identified, they were offered, we did an initial assessment with them to see how we could help and offer a variety of programs and supports to them. They also received a letter describing the services, et cetera. And then they were engaged on an ongoing basis if they were interested in whatever programs they were interested in were applicable to them. And we'll take a look at what that kind of looked like for Conway. So we took, that's the overall study, but this is kind of the Conway portion of that study. We identified about 839 people at risk, and 38% of those engaged in the program initially, which if you know engagement rates, 38%, it's pretty good. 31% of that group went on to have an ongoing engagement. Now, the really important thing to keep in mind here is that these are individuals who were at risk of not only medical cost, but absence and productivity cost as well. And so the population was not huge, but we were able to have a significant impact for those people that we were able to identify. 57% of the people were engaged on an ongoing basis with disease management, and 40% took advantage of stay at work or pre-disability vocational services to keep them at work and help to avoid the absence. So all of that's great, and we have a lot of modalities and a lot of ways that we were offering them help. But what did the results look like? Well, for Conway, they were startling. The absence, 47% less disability absence, 56% fewer claims in the study population versus the control population in the Conway portion, a little subset of that study. And our engagement with those individuals was in fact very impactful. So, and again, we're engaging in this pilot with many other customers as well. Obviously, Conway, being a big employer, had a big hand in that. So it was a little bit of a leap to say, hey, you know what? Yeah, we're gonna engage in an experiment with our partner Cigna, and so we thank Sara for that participation as well. But that's not all they had going on. Absence prediction and prevention is one part of the strategy. We have a personal health team in place for Conway, and Conway pushed us to do more with our personal health team. Sara said, well, we have drivers, like 72% of our employees are drivers, and if they don't have their license, they can't make a living. So we need for your team to be able to coach them around keeping their license so that they can stay at work. I said, okay. So we schooled up our nurses that are dedicated to the Conway team. We schooled them up on what the CDL requirements were, what the recertification forms looked like, what the key conditions were that could cause them to fail a physical, et cetera. And so when they get a driver goes out on disability, at the time of disability, they would be referred to a health coach. And they would triage their circumstances, and if there was anything that was relative to their CDL license, they could coach them on that. And that provided a lot of additional motivation for these people to become engaged. And the engagement rate among individuals who were disabled and referred to the coaching program was 67%. And again, anybody here who knows anything about engagement rates knows that's a dead ringer. That's a winner there. So these are really impactful individuals that we were able to have some significant results with. The group of individuals who are covered under the disability plan and the Cigna healthcare plan who benefit from this disability healthcare connection and the personal health team had 10% less disability absence overall and 23% fewer disability claims. So there were a lot of prongs, in the approach, and I think, Sara touched on some of the things they do around safety, but safety programs, putting safety programs in place. They also put in place a mandatory transitional duty program, which really is a huge support for us because, okay, cat's out of the bag here, carriers out there, guess what? We don't drive return to work rate. It's the employers that do. Conway, by having this mandatory transitional duty program, really did a great job of helping us drive return to work rate and drive down absence in some key areas. Let's take a look at some areas of success that Conway had in terms of engagement. They are now at 91.2% of members with biometrics, which is outstanding given where they were before. Of course, the news about those biometrics is not great yet, but at least they know what's going on. Somebody said before, identifying the problem is a great first step. They've also had a 115% increase in health assessment completion rates. And as I mentioned before, 60+% engagement in individuals who are referred from the Disability Healthcare Connect program. That and other parts of the program have helped them to reduce key areas of absence. We talked about musculoskeletal absence and fractures and sprains. We see that those are reduced significantly, and even a 50% reduction in herniated disc absence. So that's a great find for them as well. And did it have an impact on the bottom line? Sure. The absence prediction and prevention program alone in STD cost, and we didn't even throw in the lost productivity factor, et cetera, but in STD costs alone, $391,000 in savings coming from that program. And the STD program year over year saved 21,000 absence days. For those of you who don't want to do the quick math or whatever, that's like having 60 additional employees show up at your door ready to work. So I think the lesson here is that there's not one silver bullet. There's not one answer for everything. But by employing multiple strategies around engaging the individual at the right time, finding them, seeking out, identifying who those people are, and offering the right supports at the right time, we can really help to steel ourselves against whatever happens in the medical community or society or ACA or anything else by focusing on productivity. A friend of mine who's here in attendance today, Jason Sadler, always says, you can only expect what you inspect. So if you have the ability to look at those things, then you really can drive some great results. And so I'd like to thank Sara Hart for her partnership with us in the programs that we've been involved in together, and also for coming here and speaking today. I'd also like to thank Dr. Halpern, and I think that's it for our comments today, and we'll open it up for questions.
It's got to be a question.
Of course, we all know why there aren't any questions. It's because I'm not going to say it.
Happy hour.
Nobody wants to be chastised for prolonging the session.
Disability benefits if they don't participate, or is it mandatory in a different way?
The mandatory traditional duty program, yes, would cut off their benefits if they don't participate, but they do get to keep their Comcast cable.
Whoa.
Sorry. And the reason we put that in place is, as you all know, the statistics are really dreadful. Less than 0.5% of individuals who go on SSDI actually come back to a productive work job. And it's our objective to keep people both socially and physically connected to their workplace. Because if they have to get up and come to work every day and they interact with people and people are cheering them on and saying, or razzing them, however they do, they're way more motivated to get back in the truck and get back to doing their job.
Perfect. Sarah, this is kind of a two-part question for you. I work very closely with the Colorado Motor Carrier Association, and have you shared your results with the federal motor carriers or any of the state motor carriers groups?
We haven't yet. No.
Can I? So we'll talk later.
But we will partner with Gary to do so.
That's the first question. The second question is my motor carriers are challenged with the new federal regulations coming out from their CDL license and their medical information to get their card. Was that the impetus to some of this? Because your driver's BMI is gonna create some challenges.
Yeah, especially with the sleep apnea
Yes.
rules. Yes, it is, and they're very worried about it. We have a task force in place to deal with it. And in fact, we just had a first meeting with Cigna to pilot a sleep apnea study.
Nice.
Because we think our population is a good candidate to do that. So that is in the works already as a partnership.
Perfect, thank you.
Quick question about the personal health team. Who makes that up? Is that within Cigna or Conway or a combination? Can you talk about who?
The
fields
personal
that?
health team are Cigna nurses or professionals who are dedicated. We have a dedicated group or a designated group that answer Conway calls, and they do outreach and intake for people who are identified with health risks or chronic conditions. So they might manage a diabetic whose A1C levels are not in line or haven't refilled their prescriptions. So they do a myriad of different things to help coach our employees in their health risks.
Let me just add a little bit to that. So it's a dedicated team of nurses and coaches. So we got case management, we've got disease management, we've got lifestyle behavioral, all on one team, sitting together, co-located, deeply trained in what it's like to be a trucker. So they understand when somebody's a long-haul trucker, they have deep fat fryer in the back. They know this. They know what happens at truck stops. Deep understanding of what that's like, which has made a big difference. Something that Conway's also pushed us to do is to have integrated rounds. So since Cigna has the medical, the behavioral, the disability, we actually all meet together. And that's actually been extremely helpful. And you find some things just obvious. So disability will say, hey, we're trying to find this person for 2 weeks and get them disability. And we'll say, well, they've been in a coma in the ICU for 2 weeks, so yeah, you're not going to find anybody, but just give them the disability. Other things, that somebody's been psychiatric hospitalization, right? And we know that the new medications are going to increase their blood sugar and cause their diabetes to be out of control. Well, the disease manager needs to know that because trust me, that person is not focused on diabetes, and their primary care physician probably doesn't even know that they've had a psychiatric hospitalization. Just last week, we had a case, somebody actually had bariatric surgery, and then develops Guillain-Barré. I don't know if you know what that is. It's kind of ascending paralysis. Your legs and your arms get paralyzed, and it kind of goes on down. And the guy's kind of there, but not there. So we had a kind of multi-holistic, view to this guy. First of all, it's not clear that the diagnosis is there, so we're going to get him a second opinion. Physical therapy, we think, needs to be specialized for Guillain-Barré because it's not the regular physical therapy. We're going to get Voc rehab. Why not start thinking about getting him back to work already, for example? So that's the kind of thing they've kind of pushed us to do. Longer answer than you probably asked for, but it gives you a sense.
Sara, great presentation, but I have a question for the population experts here. First of all, it was fascinating to see the changes presented over the 20-year lifespan.
Was it startling?
It was exciting. But one of the things I observed about two of the main diagnoses that you discussed were there was an increase in incidence, but also a decrease in length of disability, which could be or could not be a improvement to productivity. On the depression side, fewer hospitalizations, shorter absences from work, but an increase in incidence. And a lot of that seems to me to be the availability of readily reimbursable therapies, right? And the same on back pain. The availability and the cost and the non-invasiveness of back surgery has led to an increase in incidence, or it could be one of the causes. But it also means people come back to work sooner. I mean, were you guys observing that in your?
Yeah, so I think those are really good points. I'll leave a couple of those to Steve, but I think the one thing I want to be clear about is when we looked at like total absence, we combined volume of claims and the duration. So we kind of put both of those factors together when we looked at
right in both your aggregate presentation and the individual one, you could see that there was a greater decrease in occurrence than there was in LOD overall, which means the average LOD went up, right?
For sure.
Which is what you want, because you want to get rid of the unnecessary short-term absences. So that makes sense to me. But I guess my broader question, and Steve, I'm sure you can handle this. You tend to measure over single years. If you follow the cohort of the people, and you guys are in a great position, with your long retention but if you follow the cohort, how many total days of absence over 10 years are there for the person who's being treated for depression now and for back surgery now, as opposed to, that's one of the limitations of our industry is we measure things in these short segments.
Yeah, and of course that is still a limitation within the data. Although we have a subset of those individuals who would have been covered for long periods of time, over 20 years it's hard to have the same individual. How many of you have been with the same employer for 20 years? Maybe not a lot, right? So it's hard to follow that individual through all of that.
Yeah.
So limitation in our data, I know that Tom and the research committee for IBI are looking at ways. They're trying to pull together some longitudinal studies that will really help us to look at some of that stuff. But I think there certainly are. We should be considering what those long-term impacts are of those conditions, et cetera. Steve, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, it's a very smart question. It's something that the industry dearly needs. The numbers get vanishingly small very close, very rapidly. The number of carriers that have an employer for 20 years is extremely small, and being able to track and follow those people gets to be very, very difficult. We're starting to do some of that. For example, when we do cohort analysis for biometrics, it's kind of interesting. So, normally you compare one set of biometrics to the next set of biometrics. And if you do that over 2 or 3 years, you tend to see it flattening out, right? You tend to see things get better, blood pressure gets better, cholesterol gets better, blood sugar gets better, then it kind of starts going back up again. Okay, but if you dig down and do a careful cohort analysis, what you really, and trust me, folks don't usually do this, is you're getting new people with those diagnoses. Same group of people, year 1 didn't have cholesterol, year 2 didn't have cholesterol, but now they do, right? So that makes it look like you're doing a much worse job. You need to separate those people out. So it's a way of analyzing a cohort that's not standard for the industry, but gives you very different results.
Yeah, I mean, that's exciting. I've been hacking away at IBI. I was here at the first one 19 years ago. So, see, there is new stuff, guys. No, I mean, in a lot of ways, because we analyze at such a high level that you really miss what's going on underneath. And so that's great.
Definitely.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you. Great question.
Thank you so much.